Welcome to the last lesson. The last lesson concerns the cultural heritage and spatial planning. We can describe four types of cultural heritage. The tangible cultural heritage, that is movable cultural heritage, for example, paintings, sculptures, coins, manuscripts. The immovable cultural heritage, for example, monuments, archaeological sites, and so on. The underwater cultural heritage, for example, shipwrecks, underwater ruins, and cities. The intangible cultural heritage, for example, oral tradition, performing arts, and rituals. In this presentation, we refer to the concept of tangible cultural heritage, and in particular to that of immovable cultural heritage, and namely monuments, archaeological sites, and more. The theme of cultural heritage is mainly addressed in terms of conservation and protection, focusing on the historical value of buildings, the cultural value of landscapes, how to intervene, etc. On the other hand, its impact on spatial development is much less developed, especially if we are looking for a way to enhance the system of cultural heritage through the integration of development with conservation and protection. The integration of cultural heritage conservation with spatial planning policy is therefore lagging behind. In most Western European countries, spatial planning functions are poorly integrated with the heritage conservation objectives and political mechanisms for development and conservation show little or no interconnection. In the field of planning, cultural heritage is often linked to economic policies and investment needs, with few reflection on the spatial aspect or their development. So often, a monument or landscape is preserved, the context or the relationship between goods is instead neglected. To overcome this aspect, we can refer to the concept of preservation by development, which also includes the concept of valorization and requires close collaboration between spatial planning and design, based on historical knowledge. This collaboration requires an innovative methodology of planning and design that refers to the concept of integrated approach. For example, an approach able to combine the need to protect and preserve the cultural heritage with the socio-economic development needs of the relevant territories. Therefore, on the one hand, there is the protection and conservation of cultural heritage, understood as buildings, but also as contexts. And on the other hand, there is the development, the transformation of the landscape. With regard to the spatial planning of cultural heritage, at least two approaches can be distinguished. The approach to building and context scale, looking for models for revitalization and development. Cultural heritage is not seen as an isolated building or object, but rather as a work of art, a part of the near and wider context. The meaning of the context to which we refer is that of landscape, or rather of the relationship between the cultural heritage and the identity of the surrounding landscape, a relationship that we consider inseparable. The context influences the heritage and its requalification. Even when new uses of the heritage are foreseen. The effects of this interaction can make heritage recognizable and can stimulate its sustainability. In this approach, cultural heritage can be used for the place branding of the context, the reuse and branding of historical buildings and landscapes can provide a response to the growing need for new sources of spatial identification and distinction. Cultural heritage have not only proved to be a valuable source of local and regional identification and distinction, but also a catalyst of urban and regional revitalization. As a crucial element of integrated design, where architectural design is integrated with landscape context design with a multidisciplinary approach involving architecture, aesthetics, ecology, tourism, economics, etc. etc. Approach to regional territorial scale. The approach described in the previous point concerns the spatial planning of the cultural heritage context on a local scale, a scale that concerns the urban system, the peri-urban one, but also the surrounding territory, natural or rural environment. But if we consider cultural heritage in terms of system, the cultural heritage networks, we can also recognize an approach to spatial planning at the regional territorial scale. In this case, the integration of protection and valorization of the cultural heritage system in its contexts with protection and valorization of the landscape system can be tackled through design tools such as the landscape project. The landscape project is an instrument that intervenes on the landscape and can modify or construct it. That is an instrument in which the action of spatial transformation, development, risk, degradation are complementary to the inevitable realization of new landscapes. The latter action that recognizes the centrality of cultural heritage and especially of the local community. In the field of integration between protection, conservation of cultural heritage with spatial planning and development issues, the participation of citizens and stakeholders and communication play an important role. The unilateral approach of the public bodies must be replaced by horizontal collaboration, the governance. In addition to the knowledge brought to the experts and the scientific side, the knowledge and evaluations of cultural heritage brought by citizens and stakeholders must also be introduced. The knowledge of the first can also be superimposed on the knowledge of the second, but the first are carriers of an essential knowledge related to the heritage, social and cultural aspects. The meaning that citizens give to cultural heritage is dynamic. It differs between individuals and groups, unlike the technical scientific knowledge to which the physical and spatial component of cultural heritage refers more. Jensen et al. State that the heritage conservation is a contested aspect of spatial planning. This is partly related to the complexity of identifying which aspect of the built environment should be retained. It can also be difficult to establish definitive meanings for heritage, value and significance, partly because the meanings of heritage have shifted from a narrowly aesthetic and historic understanding to one that includes social, economic and cultural components. At the end of the last century, important changes took place that transformed the thought of historic buildings and landscapes conservation into a much more dynamic concept. We are moving towards a more holistic idea of heritage, more inclusive and participatory community-led practices. This is the attitude that characterizes today the spatial planning of cultural heritage and was developed in 1985 in the Granada Convention. The Granada Convention for the Protection of the Architectural Heritage for Europe not only concerns objects of exceptional quality, but also parts of towns and villages, and underlines the role of spatial planning in the maintenance of the heritage and its social structures. A publication by the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands surveys the knowledge available at the interface between heritage and spatial development. The columns of the table, the Heritage and Spatial Development Knowledge Matrix, focus on the heritage cycle. The immovable heritage, in the form of buildings, complexes, landscapes, etc., is after all constantly being reformed, selected and constructed. This is a dynamic process in which a number of steps and or stages can be identified, which the publication called meaning, value, adaptation and management. The rows in the matrix show three levels of reflection, which we have characterized as fundamental, methodological and instrumental. Meaning. It is about the dynamic construction or interpretation process of heritage, whereby an object, area or landscape acquires an additional symbolic value that transcends its purely practical or economic significance. Value. It is about the crucial process of attributing value to heritage objects and sites in the broadest sense. Adaptation concerns things associated with the literal or figurative transformation of immovable heritage, listing, designation, restoration work to prevent dereliction or specific design intervention to make heritage suitable for new uses and or functions. Management concerns actions designed to maintain the state of preservation of immovable heritage, including planning policies and action based on planning regimes designed to protect the heritage value of a landscape. Fundamental research at the interface between heritage and spatial development is concerned with the theoretical, interpretative and or exploratory study of the principles underlying existing heritage paradigms, approaches and or procedures. Methodological research works within the existing boundaries of heritage theory to develop economic or econometric methods, for example for validating heritage, or to develop design concepts for reuse. Instrumental research focuses on the development, standardization or validation of instruments for the practice of heritage, preservation and development. The examples from Dutch planning practice enables us to construct different approaches through which the various guises of current planning treatment of heritage can be viewed. Research in the heritage as a sector approach currently largely takes place at the instrumental level, partly because of the large quantity of knowledge already available at the methodological and fundamental level. In the heritage as factor approach, research focuses on both the instrumental and methodological levels. There are still gaps at the fundamental level. In the heritage as vector approach, most academic research is currently taking place at the fundamental level, and the decisive steps of the methodological and instrumental level have yet to be taken. The figure describes how the integration between spatial development and heritage takes place. This happens in recent years, when heritage is considered a vector of development. This will be the future field of research on the cultural heritage and spatial planning relationship. Thank you for your attention. During the 5 lessons, we addressed the topic of spatial planning in relation to the valorization and protection of cultural heritage. Elements have been described that concern the meaning of spatial planning, the role of spatial planning for the European Union, the scales, forms and policies of spatial planning, the contribution of spatial planning to the shape of the city, and finally the relationship between spatial planning and the valorization and protection of cultural heritage. The lessons were aimed at providing a general knowledge on the subject of spatial planning, but some critical elements taken from the scientific literature were also addressed. In particular, emerges the difficult relationship between the actions of valorization and protection of cultural heritage and those of spatial planning. Today, cultural heritage is still very often considered a sectorial theme related to single elements, separated from spatial planning, while new trends consider cultural heritage as a system of elements, a vector for spatial development. This passage is first of all cultural, and it will be a difficult process, started with the Granada Convention or the European Landscape Convention. So many fields of research are open, which have yet to be addressed and developed. In the next slides, we scroll some bibliographical references used for our 5 lessons. Thank you for your attention.